All right, let the record reflect we have reconvened with all members present. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I have a motion for the executive minutes of July 27th.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call vote.
Mr. Catalanello?
Yes.
Mr. Landrigan?
Yes.
Mrs. Vitale?
Yes.
Ms. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Wolkowitz?
Yes.
Mr. Rowe?
Yes.
Okay, and a motion for the regular minutes of July 27, 2015.
So moved.
Second.
Any council discussion? Ostry?
There were two votes. I abstained. I wasn't
For
voting
the
yes.
minutes, the 13th.
Yeah.
July 13th
Yeah,
minutes,
July
yes.
13th
Oh,
minutes,
correct,
right.
correct.
All right. Roll call vote on as amended.
Mr. Catalanello?
Yes.
Mr. Landrigan?
Yes.
Mrs. Vitale?
Yes.
Ms. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Wolkowitz?
Yes.
Mr. Rowe?
I'm going to abstain.
Welcome, everyone. Our August meeting. There will be no second meeting this month as we go on our summer recess. Unlike other elected officials, we don't get paid for the recess, nor do we get paid when we're here. So it's well earned. We will be back. Our next meeting will be Wednesday, September 16th. So that's a Wednesday due to the Jewish holiday, or instead of the usual Monday. And it is it's the way the calendar falls. It is mid-month when we get back together. Other announcements. Anniversary is the month of August. Whenever I see this the name written this way, I get a little confused. It says Robert Cirillo, better known as Bo Cirillo, of Department of Public Works, 20th anniversary on August 1st. And Detective Edward Michko of Madison Police Department is also celebrating a 20th anniversary on August 16th. So if you see them out and about, please congratulate them on those milestones. A few other things. This past Tuesday was National Night Out. There was a little confusion in Madison. The tradition was we normally would have about 20 to 30 neighborhood gatherings, and with concern about being able to do the justice to the 20 or 30 groups, neighborhood block parties, the police department had decided not to do it this year, but we're now back up to full strength in the police department, and we're looking at a way to bring it back stronger and better in 2016. So please take a look at that. And if you look at Rosenet, we are encouraging people to step forward and help volunteer and make that a great event. In case you didn't notice, right here is a trophy. We had it here before. 2 weeks ago, I talked about trying to defend that trophy. And for those that did not make it to Dodge Field, you missed a game for the books. It was... We've been playing Quest for 3 years. They've been holding the game for 7 years, but it's been 3 years, Madison versus Quest, with the proceeds going to Project Pride and American Cancer Society. And this year, we entered the ninth inning. We were the home team, so batting last. We were down 13-9 into the bottom of the ninth, and the Mayor's All-Stars lived up to their name. Initial rally tied the game at 13 with our 82-year-old Charles Courtney scoring the 12th run. And then with 2 outs and 2 strikes and no one on, Lindsay Kozowith of the Madison Y worked a base hit, and she came around to score the winning run, keeping this trophy, which has already been engraved just in case Quest was going to contest the game, with our name. So it'll be here for another year. So congratulations to Madison and all the players, and also Quest. It was a lot of fun. One other thing I want to mention, it's on the consent agenda, is, and some people may step out before then, but we have the appointment of Jim Burnett as acting CFO. As many of you know, Robert Califoot is retiring. He'll be leaving here late November, and we need to have a smooth transition, so Jim will be coming on board continuing his role as Assistant Business Administrator, but also taking on the responsibilities of Acting CFO. It is very important to have an overlap, which was put in this 2015 budget. And as we looked at 2016 budget, Jim will be working even more closely as in the past with Robert, so we have a full, smooth transition to a new world here. And just a few things on Jim's background that we should all be proud of. You know, he's BS Finance minor from International Relations from Lehigh and MBA in Business. He, on his own time, took on getting certified as a financial officer, CFO accounting. He's passed the exam and will be eligible to complete the certification in December 2015. And you have seen his budget presentations and also heard about the electric procurement system he has put in place. He has been working hard for the borough and take it a step further as he steps into the role of acting CFO. His ability to not only understand the numbers, but to work with strategic planning and help educate the public became very evident as I was in downtown Madison enjoying a turkey lunch at Waverly last Thursday, and a resident came up to me and said, who put together that great piece that explained the Madison municipal budget? It's the first time I've ever been able to understand it. I said, well, that was Jim Burnett's work, and his goal will be to educate not only all of us, but all of Madison. So we're looking forward to you taking on that role, Jim. And with that, let's move on to reports from committees. Community Affairs, Ms. Bailey.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. The Chamber of Commerce has their monthly business networking breakfast tomorrow at 8 a.m. at Charlie Brown's Steakhouse at Southern Boulevard, Chatham. They also want to remind everybody that they're going to have their car show, their annual car show on Bottle Hill Day, Saturday, October 3rd. And they are working on a holiday ornament that they plan to start selling on Bottle Hill Day and going throughout the season. And the Chamber is currently selling advertising space on their website, and the website is now mobile friendly. There is going to be Restaurant Week in the fall, starting Saturday, October 10th, and going to Sunday, October 18th. And it is scheduled, I think, when parents are visiting the colleges. And it's also overlapping with the Madison Alliance and for Arts Gala on Saturday, October 24th. The Chamber will also be working with Deb Starker to support the Pumpkin Illumination event again this year, and the Halloween Parade and Magic Show is scheduled for Saturday, October 31st. Home for the Holidays programming is being discussed and planned with a focus on the Chamber Gift Check Program and Holiday Gift Check Program and the Holiday Gift Basket Raffle. And they're working to simplify these programs and add benefits. The Madison Eagle Christmas Fund, the Chamber partners with them and will partner with them again in support of this program. And the focus on foot traffic is canceled on Wednesday, August 19th and is rescheduled for September 2nd. And also the Contractor Forum is canceled for August, and the next meeting will be September 17th at 7 a.m. at the Nautilus Diner. And then we have from the DDC, applications and sponsorship information for Bottle Hill Day 2015 are available on the DDC page on rosenet.org. And again, I remind people, Bottle Hill Day is Saturday, October 3rd, and it's going to be expanded onto Kings Road this year. Madison Farmers Market is thriving. It's on Central Avenue, and the market runs every Thursday until October 15th from 2 p.m. to 7 p.m. There are live musical performances scheduled each week from 4:30 to 6:30. The next Sidewalk Sound Saturday concert is scheduled for Saturday, August 29th on Main Street from 3 o'clock to 7 o'clock p.m. And if you want to see a complete schedule of the music events, you can go to Rosenet. And the next museum downtown concert is scheduled for Friday, August 21st. And again, save Saturday, October 24th. That is the gala for the 24 pieces of original art that we see up on the poles along our streets. They will be auctioned that night. And from the Senior Center, for the past 2 years, the knitters and crocheters have been making caps, gloves, shawls for patients receiving treatment at the Carol Simon Center, Cancer Center. One of the volunteers took on additional responsibilities. She requested from the Senior Center any of the discarded books that they had, and they were sorted and brought up to the Cancer Center, and we got a lovely thank you note, because the Senior Center did a great job selecting the titles, and the patients really appreciated the books. And the 2015 summer seminar series has ended. That's a program that's coordinated with the library. There were 10 programs with an audience of 678 people. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Public Safety, Mr. Catanello.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Okay. Police Department training for the month of July. Sergeant Boone completed the ALICE training in response to school shootings. Let's all hope it never happens here, but I'm glad training is important. All squads were trained in COP and Crosswalks program. The police department responded to approximately 82 medical emergencies along with the Madison Voluntary Ambulance Corps in July. And the auxiliary police logged a total of 128 hours for the month, which consisted of their monthly meetings and the farmers market administrative details. I think a bright note that everyone's happy to hear that sergeant overtime for the month of July was 0 hours. The new corporal position worked 219 and a half hours, alleviating the need to spend nearly $20,000 on sergeant overtime. We still have work to do on overtime, but at least it looks like we're headed in the right direction. Some other noteworthy occurrences: dispatcher Joseph Mittermeier was appointed a Class 2 Special Officer. Significant reduction of the supervisor overtime due to corporal position for the full month, which we just discussed. And the Madison Police Department received $15,000 pedestrian safety grant for enforcement and public education. That's it, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Utilities, Ms. Vitale.
Thank you, Mayor. This report is from the Water Department. One of the most important things that they do is water sampling taken for the state mandated testing for total coliform, E. coli, volatile organic compounds, lead and copper testing, and all of that is completed for 2015, and we're in good shape with that. They're working with PSE&G that have moved off the project from Ridgedale Avenue, are now on Canterbury and Oxford Lane, so there's lots of mark-out utilities that have to be done there. The well redevelopment work has started. The motor was pulled, the casing and shaft removed, TV monitoring of the well being performed, and there's extra days that need for the redevelopment due to the age of it. There's lots of the usual installation of meters, shut-offs for contractors, installing new water services, repair and service leaks at various places in the town. One of the most important items that I want to talk about is that we've had a special request from the Water Department about watering and the use of water. It's a wonderful commodity to have as water, and we need it. So the Water Department is suggesting that it's odd even days, like we usually do, but also try not to water the lawns and the gardens until after dusk. I have one of the worst looking lawns in Madison right now, and I don't really care because the water is more important. These guys are pumping 2.7 million to 3 million gallons of water per day in this terrible heat. So please, try and be careful. The electric department, they completed installation of new poles and anchors on Dogwood Drive and began transferring the poles. They installed new secondary cable on Dogwood Drive, and they installed a new pole on Kings Road. And they drilled and reset existing pole for the Board of Education. The usual goes on with the upgrades and mark out requests and removals of service. That's all, Mayor.
Thank you. Finance Borough Clerk, Mr. Landrigan.
Thank you, Mayor. Last Thursday, the borough went out to the financial markets and sold $1.5 million in bond anticipation notes for the MRC turf field project. There was significant interest with 5 firms submitting bids. TD Bank was selected at a rate of 0.6% for a 6-month loan. The interest will be approximately $400 to $500. We hope to close with KRE on the sale of the former Green Village Road site no later than December 15th and use $1 million of the sales proceeds to further reduce the debt of the fields. Legislation awarding Madison a $500,000 Green Acres grant is still pending with Governor Christie awaiting his signature. If approved, these funds can be used to retire existing land acquisition debt for the MRC project next year. And finally, and I thought it just ended yesterday, but the budget process for 2016 has already begun. Meetings were held today between Ray, Cody, and Jim Burnett with the different department heads. Internal department hearings will start in early December, or rather early September. So it's already starting up again. That's it, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Health, Mr. Wolkowitz.
Thank you, Mayor. I had previously mentioned that one of the responsibilities of our health department is the monitoring of communicable diseases, and they would like you to know that there are no cases of Legionnaire's disease in this area. They are doing no monitoring. They have heard of none. They have not been asked to monitor any. It's unfortunate, and I'm sure as you're aware, there has been a major outbreak in New York, and it's had a number of fatalities, but so far so good as far as we're concerned. One of the other responsibilities of the health department is monitoring food and drug recalls. And what they would like you to know is that any recalls that might affect Madison are investigated and confirmed for removal from the shelves at grocery stores or pet supply companies. So they're monitoring not only recalls of food for humans, but food for your pets as well. And again, good news, at this time there are no active recalls that affect our community. When these do come up, they are, among other places, listed on RoseNet, and usually very prominently listed. So you may recall just a little while ago there was one on bottled water, and it was right on the front page. They will, of course, continue to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Public Works and Engineering, Mr. Rowe.
I don't have anything from Public Works or Engineering tonight, but I do have a quick first half review from the Shade Tree Management Board. They just want to let us know that they planted over 100 trees this year. They've also removed 100. In addition to pruning, they've done a windshield survey of every street in town to assess streets in need of pruning, maintenance, hazardous conditions, and opportunity for new tree plantings. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Communication and petitions.
Yes, Mayor. Council received a letter from Mr. Alan Andreas of Main Street regarding donation of property on Ridgedale Avenue.
Thank you. And now we're on the first of two invitations for discussion. This one is limited to items on our agenda discussion or resolutions that are on the consent agenda. So on the agenda discussion, we have the Strategic Planning Utility Committee presentation and also permanent seating for the MRC turf fields. And then you'll see the posting of all the consent agenda items either on your agenda or posted on the board. Anyone wishing to comment on any of those, please step forward, state your name, your address, and then the item you were speaking about, and then keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. Anyone wishing to be heard? Seeing none, I close this part of the meeting, and we move on to Strategic Planning Utility Committee presentation. This is the second one, and we'll have the council already has a copy of what will be less than a half hour, just 28 minutes. Ben, you want to set the stage for Martin?
Sure, happy to do that. Previously, we've had presentations by the Strategic Planning Committee on the budget, and this council has adopted guidelines as recommended by that committee. In addition, the Strategic Planning Committee on Operations has, among other recommendations, indicated that RoseNet needs to be upgraded and updated, and that is an ongoing process. I mention these two as preliminary items because I want to indicate that the strategic planning process from the beginning was intended to produce actionable items and directions. It was not to be just a high-level discussion. And in that spirit, I want to introduce again Martin Barbado, who chaired the Strategic Planning Committee on Utilities. We had an initial presentation of that committee's results in January. Today, what we'd like to do is focus on the recommendations. And then after Martin's presentation, I would like the council to have an open discussion on how to adopt and implement those recommendations. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Martin.
Thank you, Ben. As Ben noted, tonight's presentation is focused on the recommendations by the committee, and as the mayor noted, it will be held to under a half hour. I practiced that, I think I can do that, and I did further pruning when I was just sitting here. The detailed analysis underlying the recommendations was presented at the January 12 meeting and are contained in the committee's formal report. I'll tend to move more quickly through the material, so as to leave more time for questions and discussions. So the committee's work began with investigating the intended purposes and or goals of owning a utility. The committee reviewed the subjects of discussion over the history of the utility and identified the following themes and or recurring issues about the utility: independence, rates as they related to the utility's purposes and costs, rates as compared with Madison's neighbors, generating a surplus, use of surplus in municipal operations, and rates versus taxes. The committee used this history to identify 3 key words that capture the essence of the purposes and the goals of the utility: liability, rates, and surplus. And with these, develop mission statements for the utilities. More definition: reliability is how do we define it? How do we achieve it? How do we measure it? How do we compare with other alternatives? Rates: what is the approach to comparing with other alternatives, and how do we compare with other alternatives? And surplus: why do we generate a surplus? When is it desirable? And what is the projected surplus under different conditions? From here, in focusing on these key 3 words, the committee developed mission statements. And reliability is in the first bullet. The second one is comparable rates. And the third one is about a surplus that benefits the residents. Although a similar history was not located for the water utilities, we had for the electric utility, which was very, very useful. Determined that the mission principles would be similar, that there would be a focus on reliability, rates, and surplus. Now we come to the first recommendations, are to adopt the mission statements. Now, the thinking is in adopting the mission statements, it's going to go a long way towards providing the residents with an understanding of the basis upon which decisions regarding the utilities are made. Further, the mission statements should not be underestimated in their importance in providing direction on the operation of the utilities. Next are how these mission statement principles are part of operational decisions and planning. Such things as capital asset investment, reliability analysis, rate setting, and surplus generation. So some of the starting questions with reliability management: how do we know the reliability of Madison's utilities? Well, we get an understanding of that by understanding our outage experience and measuring it against other alternatives. How does Madison maximize its reliability? One component is through investment in our capital assets and maintaining capital assets. Rate management: how do we know how Madison's rates compare? And that's with an objective approach for comparing rates and with regular monitoring of those comparisons. Finally, surplus management: how do we know if Madison is realizing a net benefit from that utility surplus, and that's with an objective approach for determining the net benefit from surplus. Capital assets in optimum condition and how can we manage these capital assets with planned investment and maintenance? Now, as the council will recall, the Utilities Committee had proposed a schedule of assets. That schedule included comprehensive information on the capital assets, on installation date, expected useful life, and expected replacement date. It also included estimated replacement costs and a funding plan. However, the council's determined to retain a further. And so what the committee is not doing at this point is continuing with its assets and suggesting that the borough continue with its study, but also include this information in the study. And then that will serve as the basis for developing ultimately a schedule of assets. And then there you can put together replacement costs and a funding plan. Next subject is electric outage analysis. With the committee spreadsheet database of Madison's outage history from 2002 through, I think it was actually July 2014. Outages were categorized by causes, external causes, external to town infrastructure, weather, you had the usual animals, squirrels, car accidents, and tried to categorize them together to find trends. Established nomenclature for categorizing and recording outage information. And so the borough utility that's been keeping, not necessarily over the years, using the same nomenclature. Tried to take the information that was recorded, find common wording for categorization, and suggesting that nomenclature be adopted. Then finally, what the committee did with regard to outage was it identified an industry index to evaluate reliability. The electric utility industry has developed several measures of reliability. Indices include measures of outage duration, the frequency of outages, system availability, and response time. Most common indices we found were the System Average Interruption Duration Index, or SAIDI, and these additional indices. However, the committee ultimately selected SAIDI. It was selected for two reasons. One, its ease of calculation, and I'll that a little bit more. And the second is that it's actually used by the subsistence rural utility. It allowed us to have a basis against which to compare. So the SAIDI index is a rather simple calculation, as I've mentioned. It's the total sum of customer minutes divided by the total number of customers served. So for the period that we analyzed, July 2002 to January 2003, the average annual customer minutes of interruption were 588,000. The number of customers was 64,000, and so the SAIDI came out to 91 minutes. Now, how did this compare with other indices? So we made a comparison with 2013. The Sussex Rural score was 184, approximately twice Madison's experience. The median value for small, which Madison would qualify for, would be 179 minutes. Again, approximately twice our experience. Larger utilities, it's more like 9 minutes. So for the purposes of 2013, we could say that Madison's rate compared favorably. However, one note, large storms were not included, both Irene and Sandy, in the calculation. But for this comparison, I think that by taking that information out, I don't think it substantially changes the analysis. However, if council wanted to go back and revisit the calculation and factor in the forms, that may be something, a path that it takes. But the primary point here was not to get to a result and to give grade, if you will. Sent a way for that all right? So now we turn to rates. So the general approach was that we obtained the rate schedules for 9 other municipal-owned utilities, the MOUs, and 4 major investor-owned utilities. We applied the rate schedules to an average monthly residential electric consumption in Madison for 2013. And then we projected for that resident an annual spending under each rate schedule and then compared these projections. Now, additional considerations were that not MOUs generate surplus for use in municipal operations, and you'll see that more in the numbers. And the other one is that we didn't have all reliability information. Some anecdotal information as to JCP&L, and we didn't want to ignore it, so we tried to factor it to the best that we could. So here you can see that Madison's, starting from the bottom of the chart, a projection for Madison 2013 for average consumption for a year would be about $2,000. The average of all MOUs without Madison was $1,700. So it would look like Madison would be pretty much over market, if you will, with comparable suppliers. However, that's a mix of MOUs that generate surplus. In other words, they charge rates that generate funds above recovery of their costs, and those who are similar to Madison, that actually charge rates to generate surplus and use it in municipal operations. More of an apple-to-apple comparison, which is the second row, the average of MOUs that transfer surplus, Madison is pretty comparable. It's 2,100 versus about 2,000, or if you round up, it's close to 2,100 again. The average of the investor-owned utilities is lower, 1,800, as you can see. And the average of IOUs without JCP&L is 1,900, and it's close to Madison. Again, in doing this analysis, the point was not to give a grade to the utility. It was to identify a way to do a comparison. What had been done historically is that rate cards would be gathered from other suppliers, and then there would be a comparison to how the fee structure worked. This approach, which takes the average consumption of a resident, allows for an easier apple-to-apple calculation and comparison.
Question, yep, go ahead.
Should I hold to the end? Or just...
If you have a question on this part, go ahead.
So, line 1 does not include Madison.
Correct.
Does line 2 include Madison?
Yes. Sorry, I should have made that clear, but it does. Anything else? Now, with water, we did the same idea. Average consumption times the different rate schedules. So the average of MOUs without Madison was $900 on an annual basis. The average of the investor operators is $520, and Madison is $426. Kind of an interesting analysis. I'm not sure how we would rate this, that we are close to MOUs, which would suggest that the MOUs are generating surplus.
Right, so we don't know if they're transferring surplus?
No, we don't know for a fact. We didn't have that kind of information on it.
Thank you.
So, as I just noted, and you just noted for yourself, that the Madison electric rates are comparable with the MOUs that generate surplus, the ones that are more like us, less comparable with IOUs when you exclude JCP&L, but the water rates, Madison's rates are substantially under comparable suppliers. The more important ideas are contained in the recommendations. So we're suggesting to adopt and implement the outage database and nomenclature system. Again, a certain outage database exists, but not in a computerized, standardized format that can be used for analyses and historically can be retained easily. Utilize the SAIDI Reliability Index. As I noted earlier, there are other indices. This was the one that we were recommending use, but the more important idea is to adopt an indice, have a way to measure reliability. Regularly monitor of reliability performance, prepare and implement a planned investment and maintenance schedule for capital assets that would follow after the study. Now, In the next subject area, it's talking about evaluate annually the combined value, reliability, and rates. Reliability and rates should be thought of independent as being interdependent. Annually determine how the combination of stated results and rate comparison analysis compare with the mission. And maybe when we get to discussion purpose, we could talk more about that, but I think you could see that one pushes on the other. And make adjustments as appropriate. So, for instance, we should investigate increased investment to increase reliability. Additional next steps that we're proposing is that we create RoseNet, we call it RoseNet, but essentially it's access to SCADI and to the outage database for the residents so that they can see this information readily themselves online. Second, investigate outages by cause and by circuit and determine reliability improvement plans. Just some very, very preliminary analysis that was performed in doing the outage analysis indicated that there could be value in this. There are districts that are more prone to outages, and there are causes of outages that may be addressable through selective improvements, capital improvements. And then create an approach for measuring reliability of the water utility. Now, the last subject area is surplus. So an important consideration here was the role of utility surplus in municipal finances. And so the starting point here was to have compatibility with the Municipal Finance Planning Committee findings and their guidelines. So I pulled out the ones that were relevant for this presentation. So the Municipal Finance Planning Committee found that a $30 million budget will require $7 to $8 million annual utility transfer in order to avoid material increases in property taxes or other fees. In addition, its guidelines, it said utility budgets should recognize that future municipal budgets will likely require utility transfers up to 22% of total municipal appropriations, and that utility surplus should be transferred only to the extent that the remaining surplus is sufficient for working capital, capital expenditures, and a reasonable cushion for contingencies. So how do we determine if the combined surplus from the utilities meets these guidelines? Well, unfortunately, we can't do it yet because there's information that's needed. One of the things that's needed is the capital plan for the utilities. The utility committee had in January prepared projected surpluses that would allow for that question to be answered by comparing those projections with the guidelines. But those projections are not useful anymore because the capital plan wasn't adopted. Once the capital plan is adopted, then the projections can be recalculated and then compared with the municipal guidelines. In addition, guidelines on working capital and contingency need to be developed. So, as I note in the second bullet, with those two pieces of information, we can actually project transferable surplus and then compare it with the guidelines. Also, some sub-bullets here, too, is when the committee did it the first time, they did projections based on what-if scenarios, different rate structures, current rate schedule, reduction 10%, reduction 15%, just to see what it would look like. But that can still easily be done once the first two items have been identified. Now, the Municipal Finance Planning Committee also noted that in recent years there's been an increasing dependence upon utility transfers and less reliance upon property taxes, and that a critical question would residents be better off with lower electric rates but higher property taxes and or fees for services? Now, how should these observations be addressed? Well, again, there's a methodology needed to determine the net benefit of a surplus. That methodology would enable what-if scenarios on these rate changes. So the recommendations for surplus are to complete the capital plans, prepare guidelines on working capital and contingency, then prepare the projections on transferable surplus. Compare those projections with the guidelines and see what gaps exist and then close them, take steps to close them. And lastly, to develop a net benefit guidelines and or methodology. So the final two slides are just additional recommendations which go to enhancing reliability rates in surplus. So here's the types of things that we would suggest investigating. Automated meter readings. That'll give for immediate outage reporting and self-generation opportunities for backup. To enhance utility surplus generation, investigate updated billing software for electronic invoicing and payment, also automated meter reading to enable time of use billing, and self-generation opportunities for peak shaving. To enhance utility surplus predictability, we complete and adopt the power procurement guidelines, which have been underway. And to enhance utility surplus management, implement business unit financial reporting. Think of it as quarterly and annual P&Ls with year-over-year comparisons and customer analyses, like for large customers, compare like market segments for the electric utility. Finally, consider establishing a standing role for the Utility Advisory Committee concerning ongoing oversight of all these recommendations. That, any questions?
All right, very good, thank you. And now the challenge, we'll discuss this, and how do you capture that in a resolution, which is...
Well, I would just suggest at this point, council should ask
Yep.
me and all questions they have regarding the presentation and the recommendations, and then we can begin a separate discussion as to how we want to memorialize them.
Yes. So any questions or for Martin or comments on that? Well done. Yep.
That was, okay.
Ben,
All
you
right.
want to start?
Yeah, just, I have obviously a few remarks to get us started. One is kind of out in left field a bit, but that has to do with the issue of capital. The capital is clearly a critical component, and as Martin made very clear, there are financial aspects to the recommendations that can't be completed until we have the capital numbers that we decide are accurate and we can live with. This committee performed in a funny way a benefit, and that was that when they independently calculated the capital needs of the utilities, they came up with very different numbers than in fact the utilities have been applying over the last several years. So it raised the question, are we underinvesting in the capital that the utilities need, or is there something about the way that these estimates were prepared that biased them to the upside? And the determination was made that we needed outside expertise, so we have one company looking into capital needs for the electric utility and another one looking at the water utility. Once those reports are completed, we will take out the important information regarding their projections on capital needs, and then we will prepare all of the material that at this point is on the charts, but is so far blank because of that missing and very critical factor. So that, I just wanted to start off with that. I also think there were two parts to our discussion, and I have gotten feedback from a number, but not all council members, so I'll just talk a bit about the feedback I've gotten, and then let's open it up. I don't believe there's any argument over the recommendations. I think that, at least to date, what I'm hearing is consensus viewpoint. These are valid recommendations. They take the utilities in the correct directions, and we should implement them. Right? Where I think there's disagreement is on how we implement them. Right? And if you want, we can look at it as a range, where at one end, you would say these recommendations are obvious in how they should be implemented, and we just need to identify the people in the various parts of government who would be responsible and charge them accordingly, right? Which is, excuse me, in some ways a very efficient way of doing it, and it may well be the right way. On the other side is the recognition that there already exists a utility advisory committee, and conveniently enough, Martin happens to be on that committee as well, and we would perhaps ask that committee to look at the recommendations and opine as to how they would implement them. And that way we would have, in effect, a second set of eyes before we make what would really be some very significant changes, I think, in how our utilities have been operating. So those are the extreme versions. And they're not all that extreme, obviously. In time, I think we're talking 90 days or so, because I happen to be a proponent of going to the advisory committee, and what I would specify is they need to come back to this council with their views on implementation at the end of a 90-day period. And at that point, we would have the recommendations of Martin's committee. We'd have some advice on his part on how he would implement them. We'd have the advisory committee, and this council would have more than adequate information to make final decisions on implementation. Right? So what I would like to see us do is have a discussion where we get a sense of a consensus as to how we want to move forward on implementation, assuming I'm correct on the recommendations, that there really is no argument there. And then what I would proceed to do is take a shot at drafting that in the form of a resolution to be considered at perhaps as soon as our next meeting. I don't think we want to let this sit. I believe there's some important recommendations here that need to be acted on sooner than later. Thank you.
Thoughts, Bob?
I think Martin's presentation was very well done. There were clearly no questions. But what it did bring out is a few things, one being that there is more homework to be done. There's no question about that. I remember when the original presentation was made, there was a significant disagreement between the utility itself and what some of the findings were as far as capital needs. You know, what they were going to spend in the budget versus what was recommended. So I think that needs to be resolved, because no recommendation, I think, on rates or surplus can be made until that is resolved, because clearly the capital and the reliability of the electric utility is based upon the money it brings in. That funds it. So Ben, you're right. More work needs to be done. Once that work is done, then we could come up with maybe a cohesive plan about how to move forward. Ben, am I right? Is that the way you want to go with that?
Fine.
Yeah.
I would say I think I'd separate out the capital as a distinct issue awaiting more information, as opposed to the recommendations, which are of a whole and certainly ready to be considered, either re-examined and put in a context by yet another group, or immediately adopted. I will say, by the way, that of the recommendations, some are already in various states of play. And, you know, if of interest and we have a minute, I will turn to Jim and ask him to talk about some of those things.
While Jim's getting up there, Pat, you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd really rather not wait 90 more days, only because, you know, we had a group of people who spent a lot of time, and there is a serious overlap, I think, between some of the people who are on the Utility Advisory Committee and the people who are on this committee. So I think they had a lot of the same input. The Utility Advisory Committee also only meets once a quarter right now, so unless they're planning to probably add some sessions, I don't know how they're going to go back and review this and really add much to it. So my personal preference is I think we've spent a lot of time studying this and moving ahead, with the exception of the capital plan, because I think that is a big open question. I think the biggest variance was between what the director of the utility felt he had the capacity to do himself versus what sort of the numbers were telling us we think we should be investing, so that's why we're going outside. But my preference is towards action, and I think waiting another 90 days, I mean, we've already spent a year and a half looking at this. 90 more days just seems like it's not going to probably change a whole lot. And I think ultimately we're giving this back to the Utility Advisory Committee to manage anyway, so they still have the oversight of all this, and I think if they need to tweak it, much like any plan that you put in place, they have that ability.
Carmela, we'll get to...
I think one of the most important things, Pat, as far as Utility Advisory Committee, I talked to Jim and Fran Boardman about this. I think we have to go back to meeting on a monthly basis at this point, based on the fact that we've just taken the month off, actually. But I think we have to go back to September, October, November, December, okay, and really look at this, because this is an important factor. But I'm very convinced that we can't really move forward with a lot of the plans, like, how we should implement anything, without the consultant's determination. I mean, one of the things that Kurt Wilson is doing for us is he's really breaking this down. So, I mean, we're going to look at, the cost of whether it's a pole, a transformer, or whatever, the life of that. How much is it really going to cost? And he's going into really fine detail. My thought was that there's people on Utility Advisory Committee that know a lot about water, so they could form a committee and just work on water, which is very important. And as I always call it, the stepchild, because nobody thinks about it very much. But I think that there are people that are sitting on that committee that would take up the mantle of part of each part of this. So, I think, with all due respect, they're very, very busy people. They're high professional level people that are out working like crazy. So you have to give them the benefit of the doubt. They're volunteers. I'd like to see the 90 days, or less, if you like the word less, put in there. That's my opinion.
How about if we get Jim to talk about some of the things that
Yeah,
are already
okay.
happening, so that may help frame the 90-day conversation.
Real quick, what Ben was referencing to is we formed an internal committee with our water utility acting foreman, Tom DiBiase, Michael Piano, our electric utility superintendent, Jim Sanderson, our director of information technology, Donna Carey, who's in charge of utility billing, and Councilwoman Carmela Vitale, and myself, and Mr. Administrator Ray Cody. We've been meeting with billing software, utility billing software companies, and have been meeting with companies and talking with, Tom's had some conversations as well with automated metering companies. We have a proposal in-house that we're reviewing that would be a test start for a handgun read, but could then potentially be leveraged up to a more automated platform with the metering. And so we're working on that, but they go very much hand in hand. The metering and the ability for that meter to communicate to our billing software, and the ability for our billing software to do all the things we want it to do in the future, such as automated billing, automated electronic payments, and automated email billing. We want to make sure that we don't invest in these meters and then realize a year down the road we want to change the billing software. So we're reviewing both those at the same time, and we'll be coming to council with recommendations. Time to be determined, but we're moving as quick as we can.
Pat? And then Ben?
So, two things. One, I definitely agree. Again, the capital plan is going to take some time. I think, though, in terms of the measuring of reliability, I think that's something we should agree on that we need. And I don't think that's something that's really debatable or we really need any more advice on. Same thing with the rate analysis. I don't think that's very complicated, but I think we do want to get it every year. In terms of the smart metering and the other automation, I think we should say we want it. In what form it comes could be left up to the committee, but I think if you start to think out 3 to 5 years, we shouldn't be, in my opinion, collecting information either by having somebody walk around or even having somebody drive around. We should be able to collect it automatically. We should be able to put out bills to people who want them automatically. We should be able to collect money from people automatically. I'd hate to think in 2020, while I'm sitting here just at home paying my bill or whatever, that the borough is not in a position because we couldn't make a decision now to sort of put that marker on the ground and say that's where we want to go. And I'd leave it up to the committee and the professionals to come up with how do we get there and how quickly. But I think, in many respects, we were told we don't want the committees dictating to us what we can do. I don't want them dictating to us what we can't do. I think in some cases, some of this, because this is our one opportunity really to create a goal set from strategic planning for all these different areas, that we should also put some things in that we think are important. And that's one of the things I do.
I'm going to just slip one quick comment in before we go to Ben. I think what I had talked about wanting to have a consistency with, we saw from the finance planning, what we came up with best practices. But what we have here is kind of we're going to come up with some best practices, but we're going to have these, as Pat, you just mentioned, these things that adopting a reliability standard or possible calculation. We adopt it and we do it. It's not going to become a best practice. It's going to be the practice. And so I think this will be kind of a little different than we did with finance.
Yeah.
All right, Ben, and then Carmelo.
Okay, thank you. This was reminding me a little bit of the discussion we had when we talked about the guidelines for the budget, in that it turned out, I believe, that we were concerned more about semantics than substance, or at least we were saying, by and large, the same thing in different ways. Let me give you an example here, and if it's one that you say I could live with that, then I would say that the difference or the distance between us is very slight. So we have an index of reliability that's been recommended. I have no objections to measuring reliability, quite the contrary. I agree. I think we should be doing this annually at least, and how else do you know if you're getting what you're paying for, right? My question would be, we have a recommendation on the table to use this index only. When we go to implement reliability measures, would we want to yet consider again possibly using another index along with it that measures reliability in a different way? And I don't want to burden this committee with considering that again. I view that as a technical detail on implementation and exactly the sort of thing we have an advisory committee for. So that's how I'm looking at it. The 90-day period is just a time to allow this committee, obviously, to implement. I thought about how the budget committee waited 6 months, so we're not doing too badly if it's just 90 days. But more importantly, I just see these aspects of technical information in different repositories, including Jim's comments a moment ago, that there's yet another group working on aspects of the recommendations here. And I don't know to what extent the recommendations reflect that work or that work reflects the recommendations. I have a feeling they're independent and just happen to have met. But the short of this is, if we can agree, I would say we tick off those items on which there's really no room, right? Either you're going to measure reliability or you're not going to measure reliability. So let's start measuring it. Then the question of, do you measure it in this particular way, or do you want to enhance that? I would view as part of the implementation. Let's hear back from the advisory committee. Right?
Again, I think, they function as an advisory committee. I thought they investigated it, so I thought at least to start with that as a place to go. How did they come up with Sadie, Martin?
Yeah.
No, I understand that, but you did look into different indexes, and you did a sort of a survey, you decided in discussions. Okay.
Yeah,
Was Mike comfortable with it? Okay, I mean,
Mike-
I still think you're going to end up in the
Mike
same
is
place.
Mike is comfortable now.
Okay.
That
Okay,
also,
we've had
And they can always add more. They can
conversations.
always add more as time goes by. I
that's
just
true
wanna-
too.
wanna start
We could take it as is, with the understanding that they have the right to come back to us with recommendations on changes. That's fine too. Part of what I'm concerned about, quite frankly, is buy-in. You've got an advisory committee that we asked to advise us on the utilities. We have department heads, and although they to some extent participated, they were, I think we might agree that there wasn't as much interaction as we perhaps would have liked or thought there would be. And so this is a way to, in effect, smooth that over.
Jim, and then
Quick, once we start collecting the proper data, we can give you multiple different indexes. We chose the SAIDI index because that's the most used in our area. We can find it on a national scale. We can compare ourselves to Sussex Rural and other local utilities. But if we decide down the road, hey, let's calculate, there's another one called SAFE, there's another one called CAIDI. If we want to calculate those, we can do it as well.
Carmelo?
Yeah, I think, I just want to say this, Pat. When we all started to implement, some of Mike's suggestions as far as the handhelds are concerned, which we're moving relatively very good with, but it comes with software problems. So we have to change some software. We have to look at third-party vendors. And we've been working on that for the last couple of months. But I also believe that it is a responsibility of those department heads that are actually working with that product, whether it's the guys reading the meters right to the supervisor of that department. So that's why we've all been talking. We got a lot of great input from Tom to make sure that these handhelds not only are going to read electric, but they're going to be able to read his Neptune water meters. So actually, we had anticipated that we were going to bring an agenda rec and had a little bit of confusion with one of our vendors. So we decided to wait for September. But we're that close with that. Because one of the things that we have realized is that we're not in the 21st century as far as that is concerned. I think that the department heads knew it, and they recognized it. So, we've moved forward with that. I also think that this reliability issue is going to have to be somehow Mike's department. He is going to have to track it. So what I'd like to know from the great experts that we have on the Utility Advisory Committee is, how do we track it? Do we go to Sussex Rural? Probably. Take a field trip and see exactly what they're doing. Those are the easy things, but that again is going to be a department head responsibility, my opinion, because they're the ones that get the work out and whatever. I was looking at one of these slides, and I was thinking to myself, the rates analysis and, and how everything goes back to reliability in this town. And when we're out 91 minutes, the most, and sometimes it's only 3 to 5 minutes, the reliability of our electric department is absolutely unbelievable. I'd like to see, Tom do it for his water department. These guys are fantastic. They're out as quickly as can be, and I think that we need to know that they're doing the same amount of work because they are pulling in a surplus, okay? But there is a lot that we need to do. I think it's going slowly, but I also think that we have to keep the department heads very close and involved in this because ultimately they're responsible to all of us.
Bob and then Pat and then Rob.
Yeah. I kind of get the sense that we're kind of talking a bit in circles here about what we want. So I'm going to start off with a question. Are we looking for a resolution or best practices type document like we did with the budget guidelines to evidence or to show our buy-in to the process? That's my first question. Is that what we're looking for here? Okay. If that's the case, then I think a lot of the information is here, but I'm very reluctant to put a time frame on it. I think whether it's at the next meeting or the meeting after, that the document should contain, and I think a few of us touched on this already, those things that can be measured can be in this best practices document or resolution, whatever you want to call it. They can be in there. But we also have to recognize that there's going to be other initiatives that are going to take time to complete. Those can be in there as well under, I think Jim had mentioned it in his presentation as work in progress. And the buy-in there would be, we recognize that the following items need additional attention over the next year and by whom. And I would like to see that document before we go any further. I mean, because a lot of us are saying the same thing, but in different ways. And I think until I can see that document in front of me, because a lot of it's in here already, that's where I'm coming at right now. I want to see the document broken out between measurable and work to be done, and put that in the frame of a resolution or best practices and go forward from there. Maybe that could be done in a meeting or two.
Right, Pat and then Rob.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the thing I'm trying to do is just bring some of this to a closure so we don't keep discussing it over and over. And I would hope that at this point we're all in agreement that we want some measure of reliability. We can start with Sadie because I think it was investigated and found to be the best one that we could use at this time. And just say that issue we're not going to give back to the committee and say, come back to us in 90 days and tell us if you agree with it. The second is on rate analysis. I think that's relatively simple to do for the CFO on an annual basis. I think we should be able to agree to that. In terms of the capital plan, I think we do have to give them, well, first of all, we have to give whoever, the people we have working on it some time, and I think whether it's Martin's committee or the Utility Advisory Committee some time to digest that. So for that, I'm fully in favor of giving them at least 90 days to work that out. In terms of the smart metering, my bias is that we just say, for a variety of reasons, which Martin listed, and I can add some others, we need to have something, we need to start working on it, something that we can implement fully within some period of time, whether it's 5 years, 6 years, 4 years. But it's going to be critical both to the reliability, to the steady generation of surplus, that we have that in place. So I think, again, it's something, we could give that to the committee to validate. But on the first two, I think we should be able to say at this point, we're ready to go with them. The other two, maybe we give them some time, but I still think that as a council, we say to them, this is what we really want, would like to see. It's just a matter of how and when you do it. That's what I like.
Rob?
Thank you. So as I recall, the big discussion the last time was over ordinance versus resolution, and we decided on resolution because we wanted to have more control over it, or accept our responsibility as it pertained to what had to be done. So when it comes down to responsibility, I think the advisory committee is just that, they're advisory, and they don't have responsibility. The responsibility sits with the elected officials, the department heads, and the staff at borough administration. So I guess, in as much as we need to give the advisory committee more time on certain aspects, we should, but in the spirit of taking control over the process and things that we can implement, I think we should get going as soon as possible, on the areas that have already been investigated. So I guess it's not, we wait 90 days for everything, we do everything today. It's more like, well, if there's stuff we can do today, then let's do it, and other times we go back and we give the advisory committee as much time as they need. Obviously, we'll have to put some sort of a time frame on it, but I think that's more consistent with the decision we made over the budget. Yep. Budget, whatever they're called, I forget, guidelines or goals, I don't remember. Right. But, that was the whole thing, so.
Yep. Yeah. Austria?
Well, I spoke with Ben earlier today, and I guess my concern was whether, I likened it to the planning board. Planning board, each volunteer must take a course, but we also have a cadre of experts who are there helping us, guide us, and so my concern is whether the advisory committee, moving forward, you have your department heads, but and we also have a lawyer on the planning board too, do we need people like that with them in order to really make this process go forward and help?
Well, part of it's the consultant,
on the advisory committee.
You mean they're volunteer professionals, correct?
No, we have Mike Piano.
Yeah, no, I know that.
Yes,
I
yes.
know that.
And
Bob
we've
Vogel.
also hired a consultant as far as the capital part of it.
Okay,
So
so
obviously
that
pulling-
covers the basis, and
Yeah.
that consultant would talk to that advisory committee?
Right.
Okay, all right.
Ben, you were?
No, I'd just like to reserve last comment on, because
Yeah.
I'm actually far along on where I hope to be. Maybe a surprise, but I feel this has been extremely helpful, but I'll talk about that in a second.
Okay, yeah, I think we're, but right,
Well, I'll just say, there were two issues from my perspective the last time, and the ordinance, well, I'll set that aside. We're obviously not going to go in that direction. The other is, though, that we have specific goals, which is, what we want to see done and when we want to see it done. The rest can be filled in by other people because they're going to have to come back and tell us who can do it, when they can do it, how much time they need, how much money. But I think we should set the standard or set the goals for everybody and say, this is what we expect from our department heads or our administrators, so that they know what they want. And strategic planning is about, where do you want to be 3 to 5 years down the road? You want to know 5 years from now that you made a difference because you made decisions now. You didn't defer them 90 days, 180 days, or just gave people, like, we like to do this, but not with any specificity that really drove them to get it done.
okay, I think we're,
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
One thing that occurred to me as we were all speaking, and I'd just like to touch on this for a moment, is that this discussion of implementation is in addition to the discussion on recommendations, and there's no second guessing here. I mean, Martin and his committee managed to get 6 very independent people to agree that these are valid recommendations and they need to be followed, and there were certain things that were mentioned in those recommendations that either have only tangentially been discussed in public meetings or haven't been discussed at all, and will probably make a great deal of difference to how our utilities function. So I just want to make that clear to you and your committee members. Insofar as the issue of implementation, as I hear you all, I don't think this is as big a difference as I perhaps painted initially. And I do believe I now have a better sense of where everyone is. We were dealing before via email and phone call, and it's always good to have a group in a room. And so if it's okay with all of you, I'd like to take a crack at a resolution that reflects this discussion, and we'll consider it at a subsequent meeting and see if indeed we can't agree on it. But, you know, I just want to say, I've said this often, I'll say it again. When the strategic planning process began and we asked for volunteers, and I was able to identify a few people to be chairs, I'm in my fondest dream, right? I didn't think it would come out as well as it has. And I believe, thanks to the efforts of people like Martin and his committee members, we made some great progress in the utilities. We've done the same in the budget. We're doing the same with our operations, and I think you'll see the same in capital as we go forward. So again, thank you all.
Yep. Thank you, Martin, and your committee. I see a couple members in the audience. So I think you captured, Ben, so we'll be looking for that in the near future.
Good, thank you.
All right, number 2 on agenda discussion is permanent seating for the MRC turf fields. Ostry?
Oh, thank you, Mayor. There's been discussion, you know, clearly, if any of you have gone to the MRC and our wonderful turf fields, we don't have any permanent seating. And I know the parents are concerned, when are we going to do it? When are we going to get it? And there are numbers thrown out as to what it costs, what's involved. So I think I'd like to see us go out and at least get some idea of what it's going to cost. Is it going to involve using Board of Education property? What can we get there? How much can we get there? What is the cost? That will be our first step. And then to figure out how to design and install permanent seating. And then the next step is, where do we get the money? So I think that, you know, with the Borough Administration and Zach Ellis as rec director and Bob Vogel, I think we should see if they can go out and investigate that, and I'd like to be part of that.
So at this point, you're suggesting in-house expertise, so Bob Vogel's engineer?
No, actually not. I'm thinking that you can. I don't expect it to cost money, but I think we should be talking to companies that install this and get their opinion as to, you know, what it would take.
Yeah.
Let's get some ballpark figure. I mean, a lot of different numbers are being thrown out, and you know, this is sorely missing at this complex.
Bob, and then Ben, and then Pat?
Yeah, I agree with what Astrid's doing 150%. To me, these are magnificent fields, but they're sorely lacking in facilities for spectators. And I don't view it just as a matter of comfort, I view it as a matter of safety. When I go to these games and I see people sitting on top of a hill, right on the edge with folding chairs, God forbid on a rainy day somebody falls and hurts themselves. The cost of liability alone would probably far outweigh the cost of seating. So I think this is a very good move. I would like to see some conceptual designs and costs and move forward from there. So I think this is long overdue.
Okay, Ben, and then Pat?
Yeah, I would agree with those comments, and just wanted to know if indeed we need to allocate funds to initiate the process of examining whether we need something or how we need it, or that's the sort of thing you get pro bono with companies who are looking to sell you their expertise.
Yeah, I think it's pro bono.
Okay. Then it's much easier.
Yes, me too. That's what I thought.
Pat?
Are we looking to put stands up by both fields on one side, both sides, or are we just going to look at a variety of options and then
I
come
think
back to
look
council and
look
say?
for a variety of
here's
options.
the-
We have a
Okay.
meeting, the rec committee has a meeting Wednesday night.
Okay.
So I'll talk to them, the members there, and I'll talk to Zach, and then Zach and I and administration will go out and figure out what we can do.
Okay.
I
I mean, I
think
know
the-
at the end of last, well, I'll just finish up. At the end of last year, I'd asked everybody sort of for their wish lists, and one of the things that consistently came back was stands. I think it's critical that we ask each of the groups that have major participation there, what do they see? Is it one, or does it at a minimum have to be something for both? Because I don't know if everybody's using primarily both fields or just primarily one field. I know football, I think, is primarily on one field. Soccer is probably on both, although depending on what option we come back, can they shift their more critical games to the others? And then I guess we should also talk to the Board of Ed, since they also utilize those fields, about
Right,
a variety of options.
right.
Yeah, I think one of the advantages of having the time this way is now we have a couple of years of the fields being in use. This is kind of the community college approach of don't put the sidewalks in until you see where the paths are. We now know how we're using the fields and where people put themselves, even if it's on the edge of a hill. So we know how what type of seating may help, and so that'll help. Carmela?
I just had a thought as we were talking about the, the turf fields. It's very nice to, to isolate and do something because those fields are used. But we have other fields. We have the soccer field down in Rosedale. We're going to be doing some work there. I think it'd be good for the rec committee to incorporate and look at all of the fields and what's necessary. Sometimes when you're buying a lot, you get a better price. There's stands that are going to be available from Kings Road, where GVR was, because those fields are not going to be in use, and there's a couple of, stands there as well. But I think I would like to see what, the cost and incorporate, the soccer, the soccer fields and whatever too.
Bailey Eller.
So the primary is going to be MRC, but also to rec committee, just see if there's any other pressure points seating-wise. Pat, then Bob?
I was going to say we could look at it, but I think most of the other fields have some sort of portable stands. And in my experience, having played, coached, and I'm putting the word coached in quotes, soccer games at almost all those fields, the amount of stands is generally sufficient for the number of people show up. And people actually like sitting on the hills and their folding chairs and whatnot. It's kind of interesting because when you go to soccer matches around the county, you never know what you're going to find. So everybody has a set of folding chairs in their car. But the MRC has a unique problem because we can't easily just slide the standard type of stands in there. We're going to need to do some serious work on the hill in order to fit something in there. So that's why that's always been a challenge. And I think we're going to find that that's going to be a fairly expensive project.
Yeah.
And I don't think our other fields are underserved. But I think we should check with the rec groups to see if they feel that we do need stands anywhere else.
Right.
Bob?
Okay.
She's scaring me because I was thinking the same exact thing about a bulk purchase. I know you do. I think it is wise to get prices to do other fields, like Bailey Eller, take for example. That's a very, very large field where you have several games. In a way, it's kind of another version of the turf fields, only it's natural grass. So I think if you look at that as well, just for information purposes
No,
only,
yeah,
you may or may not want to go with it.
We've had a discussion about that.
take a look at it.
I mean, the MRC fields, this was going to be where we were going to have permanent seating, lighting, because there wasn't in any neighborhood.
Yeah.
And, we're far from that. So I think that's why the parents have been driving this issue with respect to that. And, Zach says there are portable bleachers at Bailey Eller, which seems
Okay,
to
good.
satisfy,
All right.
that need. Yeah.
Good.
Okay, so Ray and staff, you've got marching orders as to
Right.
start working on
Yeah, I'll
that,
go
and
start
you'll
with
be
it.
working through the committee structure.
Right.
Street. Okay, excellent. Okay, ordinance for hearing. Will the clerk please read the statement?
Ordinance scheduled for hearing was introduced by title and passed on first reading at the regular meeting of the council held Monday, July the 27th, 2015. It was posted and filed according to law, and copies were made available to the general public requesting same.
Call up the ordinances for second reading. Ask the clerk to read said ordinances by title.
Ordinance 48, 2015, ordinance of the Borough of Madison amending Chapter 155 of the Madison Borough Code entitled Sewer to update the sewer connection fee schedule.
I open the hearing for ordinance 48-2015. Anyone wishing to comment, please step forward. Seeing none, I close the hearing.
Mr. Mayor, I move ordinance 48-2015.
Second?
Any council discussion? Roll call vote.
Mr. Catalanello?
Yes.
Mr. Landrigan?
Yes.
Mrs. Vitale?
Yes.
Ms. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Wolkowitz?
Yes.
Mr. Rowe?
Yes.
I declare ordinance 48-2015 adopted and finally passed, and ask the clerk to publish notice thereof in the newspaper and file the ordinance in accordance with the law. And now we're on to our second of two invitation or discussion. This is when anyone in the audience can step up and speak on any topic. But again, please keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. As you come up, state your name, your address. Michael.
Mike Soriano, 230 Woodland Road. I just really have a question. I understand there are 3 consultants working, one for the electric utility, one for the water, one for the borough. I have heard nothing about when those 3 consultant reports are going to be complete. I think they're very important as part of the strategic planning operating plan process. And yet you've talked a lot about 90 days for, some reports, but I've heard nothing about any due dates or expected dates when the consultants are going to be back.
Ray or Jim, do you have a?
I can do it. Yep. Sure. 3 separate vendors have been hired. Kleinfelder is an environmental consultant that currently represents the borough at the joint meeting, which is a joint venture with the Borough of Chatham. They're doing the sewer infrastructure study. Kurt Wilson, who's a consultant to the electric utility, was selected by Mike Piano. He's currently has his work process underway for a critical infrastructure analysis. He's indicated he's approximately 30 days out on delivering his report. The reason for the time frame, he's actually getting pricing, not just ballpark estimates. He's getting 2 to 3 prices per item per vendor for the item. So it's going to be a very detailed report he's coming back with. Water is a little bit of a challenge. We had engaged Omlin Engineering to do the water direction and to work with Tom. There were some immediate issues working with Tom just to, he took on a big responsibility very quickly, and so we want to make sure he got off to a good start. And then the consultant for Omlin, who had been hired away from the Southeast Morris Municipal Utility Authority, who had 30 years experience as a water expert, which was the reason we engaged Omlin, decided to leave the firm. So we're in the process of sitting down with Omlin and see if they can continue the engagement and identify someone within their company with the expertise. If not, we'll probably morph to a different vendor that has water-specific expertise. So I'd say we're at least 30 days out on all 3 initiatives, but it's going to be a very comprehensive report. Then we turn it over to the committees, as Ben has suggested, for analysis, and then come to the governing body with.
I wanted to make sure those are fairly high profile, because I think it's not going to be too long before you're into the following year's operating plan budget.
Right, a lot is unbalanced on that. Anyone else wishing to be heard? John, I'm sorry. Go ahead, John. You have a...
Mayor, it's my understanding that one of your employees has asked that his job performance be discussed in public session with regard to the meter reading job. This would be the time for that discussion. You have to understand, though, what you can talk about is yourself, because the other employees that have been reviewed or interviewed for this job and the one that's tentatively to be appointed have not agreed that they should be discussed in public. So at this point, if you want to come up and discuss your performance in the position and why or why not you were picked, this would be the time to do it.
So with those guidelines, anyone wishing to be heard? Yep.
I'm Joe Negri with the Water Department. I'm here just to discuss why I'm not qualified for the meter reader position. I just want an explanation for that.
Okay. Yes.
Joe, thanks for coming in. And because you've provided us with a report that we can talk about your performance in public. That's normally we would not be doing this in public. Maybe it would be helpful to go through the history. You were appointed on November 24th, 2014 by Resolution 324 of 2014 as a laborer in the Public Works Department. And as part of that hiring process, you signed an employment agreement that indicated that within 90 days of you starting work, that you would secure your commercial driver's license, the CDL.
Yes.
And that would have taken you till March of 2015 to secure that. And the last I checked as of today, you still don't have your CDL. So you're 5 months over
Yes.
the requirements to get your CDL. Which is a concern because it was a condition of your hiring for the first job. So in effect, your current job is in jeopardy. Forget about a promotion. Your current job is in jeopardy. You're on a probationary period, a 1-year period, and that should have been done within the first 90 days of the job. And now
Yes.
we're 9 months.
But I've explained it's impossible to get your CDL in 90 days.
Is it impossible to get it within 9 months? I guess is the question.
I mean, the way the testing is now, they're only taking 4 people a day, so your test schedules are way pushed back. And they just changed the entire test, so it's not the same CDL test.
Okay, but have you taken the test and failed it?
Yes,
How many times?
once.
And how about the written test?
I only took it twice.
So you failed it the first time, passed
One
it the
time,
second?
yep.
Okay. All right. That's a concern in terms of qualifications to be promoted to a higher grade level. Second is during the interview, we asked about experience in terms of meter reading. You're a licensed plumber, a master plumber, and we acknowledge that. You've done great work in the water department on the plumbing side, but you were very straightforward. You have no experience reading electric and water meters door to door, going into people's homes, doing that.
I actually installed the meters. And
No, I understand, but
I read
have-
water meters every day.
All right. Have you ever read an electric meter?
No,
No,
but
okay.
I'm sure it's,
Well, we have 5,500 electric meters that need to be read on a monthly basis. Water gets read quarterly. So electric, from our perspective, is much more important because that's the revenue that is generated to run this community. It comes from the electric much more so than the water. Water's important, and Jimmy does a great job with Tom on the water. Third would be during the interview process, we explained how important it is as a meter reader to know the streets, similar to a mail carrier, a policeman, a fireman, and we listed 10 streets and asked you to identify where the streets were, and of the 10 streets, you didn't know 8 of the 10 streets.
okay, but at the same point, what about a rookie police officer that's not from this area? He comes in and he doesn't know the streets right away either.
Well,
It's an entry-level job and he needs to learn that.
Well, there's difference. The difference is he rides with another officer for the first 6 months to learn the community. A meter reader, you're on your own. We give you books, we send you out, and you got to go do your route, and you got to read it and bring back the revenue. And if you don't do that and don't know where the streets are, that's a challenge.
But there's also maps.
No, there are maps, but when you work in a community, you should know the streets, especially when your job is to walk from street to street, reading the meters in homes. And, a hit rate of knowing 2 out of 10 didn't send a signal. So those were the 3 basic reasons. And then in terms of, not mentioning the candidate that's being recommended and will not be discussed, but he's been employed for 10 years reading meters. He has been Employee of the Month for 2 times in the last year. When we have interim part-time meter readers, and summer help, he was in charge of training them. He doesn't miss a day of work. He's excellent on accuracy, punctuality, attendance. And when we were down our meter reader, because our permanent employee was injured, and our part-time meter reader tore her tendon, he carried the department on his back. So that's someone that we feel strongly should be getting the full-time position because he carried the department forward and is qualified to do the position. And the last reason is our attorney has opined that it's a managerial prerogative to hire the best qualified person for the job. And unfortunately, you're not it, and the person being recommended is the person that we feel is the most qualified, and that's the reason. And I wish you'd just picked the phone and called me, and then I hate putting this on a public record about this, but that's the reasons.
I just wanted to get a full understanding of how, not knowing certain streets is going to, I install meters now and I get sent to a job. If I don't know the street, I'll find it. It's not like I can't figure that out.
Well, the important thing, the number one reason would be the current job, you haven't met your qualifications. In effect, there's a discussion in terms of whether we're going to stay the course with our probationary laborers who haven't secured their CDL within the time frame that was laid out for them.
Just so we're not repeating and I don't want to we always try to avoid during comment time getting it back and forth, but so have you gotten the answers to the questions you asked?
Yeah, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, and thank you for taking the time to come out tonight. Jimmy?
Thank you. Jim Finelli, 42 Dean Street. I know I'm not supposed to comment on that job, but it's an entry-level job, meter reader job. It's a $10,000 increase from the salary he's receiving right now. And he certainly wouldn't need a CDL license to read meters. So we cleared that problem up with the CDL license. I don't understand how that's happened. And Tom and I don't want to lose Joe in our department. But at the same time, I applaud his efforts to go for a $10,000 a year job that requires no schooling, no continual schooling, no state licensing, no licensing for the water, no CDL license, no requirement to be on standby, no requirement to do any overtime. Kind of hard to turn down, kind of hard for any of you to tell me he didn't make the right choice by trying to get a job. He makes $10,000 more a year, do less. But that's management's prerogative. Besides that, I came really to congratulate Jim on his acting CFO title. With that, I'd just like to know if someone can explain to me what acting designates here in the borough. Because I see now that we're not promoting too many people, we're making them acting something. Tom is the acting foreman of the water department. I'm acting lead man. Vito's acting foreman of the sewer department. We've got acting sergeants, I guess, in the police department now. Jim's an acting CFO. What's the requirement before you actually get to obtain that position? What needs to be done? I mean, can someone tell me? Ask me a street, I'll tell you where it is. I mean, there's got to be something that's going on here. I'm just wondering what it takes.
It varies by position, and this is not the John.
I guess the only thing I can say is, and I don't know, I'm not your normal lawyer.
Right, I understand.
I'm playing fill-in today. But in the case of the acting CFO, you presently do have a CFO. He hasn't retired yet. He doesn't officially retire until April, so you can't have two people in the same position. So you can't appoint a CFO until the present CFO officially retires. So with regard at least to the position we're talking about with Jim, is that he would be acting
very understandable.
At least until such point as he retires. As far as the other position goes, I don't know that I'm in the position to actually answer that.
Okay. And how about the report that was done on the operation of the DPW? I know you don't know about it, but when will we come up with a consensus on how we want to proceed with that? Did everyone get a chance to look at the report? I know our union has opened it to try and get a copy so we could see it, but we haven't been successful yet. So we're just wondering if there's some kind of idea or some kind of plan going forward that we can hope to see a light at the end of the tunnel or something?
My understanding is it's still presently in draft form, not been finalized?
No, it's been prepared, it's been distributed to the governing body, it's under their consideration, and they tell the administration what they want to do with it in terms of implementing the recommendations of the consultant. And when they're ready, prepared to act, they'll instruct Jim and I to act.
But at this point, there's nothing for immediate action, but there is plans. Obviously, we did the study, and there will be discussion, and there will be steps.
Okay, and I do appreciate. I did hear Mr. Cody express the amount of work that Tom's taken on as a foreman now. We also have a extremely grossly underappreciated and underpaid secretary, which is what her title is, at the Water and Light, and we would appreciate if there's any consideration given to the work that's being done by people that show a commitment to the town, as was worded by the borough. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Anyone else wishing to be heard? Seeing none, I close this part of the meeting. And we move on. There are no ordinances for introduction. Ordinance 49 was pulled. So consent agenda resolutions. Will the clerk please read the statement?
Consent agenda resolutions will be enacted with a single motion. Any resolution requiring expenditure is supported by a certification of availability of funds. Any resolution requiring discussion will be removed from the consent agenda. All resolutions will be reflected in full in the minutes.
And we're going to be moving and reading 246 separately. So
You want me to do that first?
We'll do the consent first.
Okay,
Yep.
so, Mayor, I will move R233, R234, R235 is taken off the table, then R236 through R245, R247, and R248.
Have a second?
I second.
Any discussion? Roll call vote?
Mr. Catalanello?
Yes.
Mr. Landrigan?
Yes, but I'll abstain from R238.
Mrs. Vitale?
Yes.
Ms. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Wolkowitz?
Yes.
Mr. Rowe?
Yes.
Okay, will the clerk please read Resolution 246-2015?
Resolution of the Borough of Madison appointing James E. Burnett IV to acting chief financial officer. Whereas the mayor, with advice and consent of the Borough Council, has appointed James E. Burnett IV to the position of acting chief financial officer effective August 11, 2015. And whereas the Borough Council wishes to set a pensionable stipend for this appointment. Now therefore be it resolved by the Council of the Borough of Madison, County of Morris, State of New Jersey, that acting chief financial officer James E. Burnett IV's salary shall be increased by $1,667 per month pensionable stipend commencing August 11, 2015, while he serves as acting chief financial officer.
Do I have a motion?
Yes, I move R246.
I'll second.
Council discussion. Rob?
Okay. So my questions have nothing to do with the individual nominated for the role. It's simply on the timing and the title. So if I understand, and I must be unique because I don't understand acting, because so what I thought acting meant by law, there has to be one of three circumstances. Number one, the position has not yet been formally created, and we know we have a CFO. Number two, the person is only occupying the position temporarily in an effort to ensure continuity. Since we have a permanent CFO, that doesn't apply. Or number three, the person does not have a mandate. Now, what I don't understand is how we can have a CFO in residence and an acting CFO concurrently. So if we were to appoint the candidate effective tomorrow, wouldn't that imply that the current CFO would be retiring tomorrow or going on terminal leave, and then once the terminal leave had ended, to ensure continuity, the candidate would be active, and then once the terminal leave ended, we would remove the acting from it and just make it a CFO. So what I don't understand is how we can have an acting CFO and a permanent CFO both in the building at the same time. That's my question.
The borough attorney has opined that that's appropriate, common. When I got appointed as administrator, Jim Allison was here for an additional 6 months. The only reason we're doing it this way, Robert's going to be leaving in November of this year. The budget that everybody here voted on and approved contemplated a 4-month overlap. The funding is in the place so that there's an institutional transfer of knowledge from Robert to Jim. Not that we'd need it, but if there was an external candidate, it would have been much more obvious the need for that. Robert's going to be physically out of the building in November. This is just good, proper succession planning to have Jim in place and appointed as acting. The reason we can't name him acting, or you have to name him acting, is you can't have two pensionable titles at the same time. And so this is to protect Robert's pension. And we're following the advice of the borough attorney to do it this way. And we've done it with the tax collector, with the borough administrator.
And borough clerk also.
And borough clerk. So it's nothing new. It's the same we've done for years. And it's legal. And it's recommended by the borough attorney. Process.
And it's pretty much addresses number two, which is continuity of that as Robert leaves the building, that we have that continuity.
Again, I'm not going to discuss the candidate in question in public session, but I believe continuity is the least of it, because obviously everyone supports the candidate in question because of the knowledge of the workings of the budget, and we've heard all these great things. The second thing secondly, in addition to having an acting CFO and a permanent CFO at the same time, so who do the people report to then that currently report to the CFO? Do they report to the acting CFO or to Mr. Califat until Mr. Califat goes on terminal leave?
Robert is the CFO. They report to Robert, but Robert has worked very closely with Jim, and we don't really look at the titles. And in many cases, Robert goes to Jim for direction and advice because Jim is at a higher level because of being the assistant borough administrator. So Jim is over Robert and basically supervises his work. So if he has issues with Robert's staff, he'll go through Robert to have Robert direct the staff. But we envision Jim's going to be in here tomorrow rolling up his sleeves and working on things that may need some attention that hasn't had Robert's full attention. They'll be working together.
And as it pertains to the, for me, it would be much cleaner if, considering the amount of overlap as it is, if we made the appointment effective the date of the permanent CFO's, I guess, the beginning of his terminal leave when he leaves the building. I think it, I wasn't here, when you got your job, right? I think that there's significant enough management overlap that it could become confusing, and I just think it's a cleaner way to do it.
Yeah, I think
I'm not disputing the candidate.
Yep.
I'm disputing the methodology and the timing.
Yeah,
And at the same, and again, I don't recall, as it pertains to any compensation, but we are going to be asking the taxpayers to pay two people to do the same job, essentially incremental money for a short period, but still, I don't know about the rest of you, but I got 20, 25 calls this weekend when people got their tax bills. They're angry. And, while we need to do everything to ensure proper continuity and to reward loyal employees, at the same time, we also have to represent the taxpayer. So wouldn't it make more sense to have this appointment effective October 1st, November 1st, whatever day we would assume the CFO would start his terminal leave?
Yeah, I think the intent of the overlap, not only, obviously, it's not as if Jim was not involved in the budgeting process before.
I'm not disputing any of his qualifications, nor am I questioning the selection process
let me
or
just
the
finish,
selection of Jim.
Let me just
There's
finish
nothing
the
like this. It's purely-
comment. What this does make very clear is we want him now to get into the weeds because the weed whacker is leaving and we need him to take over. And so we need to have that overlap so he really is in the day-to-day part of it and not just the supervisory part. As we know, as we discuss this position, and more to come in the very near future, is the ability to actually provide the taxpayers with savings. We've held back on, we sliced out part of the resolution, but it talked about Jim is not walking away from some of his current responsibilities, and so we will be coming back with a streamlined management position, which will save the taxpayers money. So this is step one in that process. So short-term pain, yes, for spending a little extra money, but in the long run, it will be saving money for the borough. Tell you.
Yeah, you saw me. Just two brief comments. One is that I, for one, was not surprised by the notion of overlap for several months. And what I was trying to do, as you were speaking, is recall if I was not surprised because we talked about that as part of the financial planning for the borough, or we had talked about it at council. But we certainly had talked about it. And it had been very carefully considered regardless of who the candidate was. So when we initially went out, the thought was, when do we make this position effective? And we always felt that it needed to be 3 to 4 months of overlap between the new CFO and the departing CFO to ensure the continuity of our financial condition. And the other thing is, I said this once in a somewhat joking fashion, but I would offer advice to you, Rob. I've gotten similar calls. If you want to talk to someone about your taxes, you got the wrong person. I'm not saying we should blow off anyone.
Right.
I'm paying the same you know, I too would like to see my taxes lower, but the council is hardly the place to start that discussion.
And I understand, but just because everybody else jumps off a bridge doesn't mean you should do it too. Like, my mother told me that 1,000 times. So
I don't think I understand
well,
that.
the Board of Ed can't control its spending, or the county can't control spending. That doesn't mean we shouldn't try to control our spending.
I think we do an excellent job.
I'm not saying we don't, but that doesn't mean we can't. That doesn't mean we can't keep our pencil sharp.
No. But I would say if you look at 3 years' worth of experience, the effective tax increase for our residents has been under 0.5%. That's over 3 years. That's not a year.
Yes, nominal, but we're not adding in the money we didn't give back when the lowering of the electric rates. But that's a completely different debate, right? And we shouldn't have it now. We're talking about something else. We're talking about something else.
Yeah, let me get Bob in here. He raised his hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. You know, I worked in corporate America for years. And one of the largest mistakes that corporate America made was, well, let's try to save the pennies when you have $1 million at stake. You can see it in their performance. You can see it in the loyalty of those employees. And now when you look at what's going on here, well, you say CFO. Well, you think it's just preparing financial reports. No, it's not just that. He's going to be learning and trying to gain the respect and working with the staff that currently reports to Robert Califoot. There's your overlap. It's not just preparing reports. That's one part of it. So that's a lot of additional responsibility, and I feel that anybody who takes on additional work should be paid accordingly. You know, there's an old saying, a fair day's work for a fair day's pay. If you're going to throw that much work on a person, then they should be paid accordingly. That's number one. I think that's just about it. I'll let it go with that.
Any other comments or, okay, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Catalanello?
I abstain.
Mr. Landrigan?
Yes.
Mrs. Vitale?
Yes.
Ms. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Wolkowitz?
Yes.
Mr. Rowe?
Yes.
Right, there is no unfinished business. Approval of vouchers.
Okay. Public safety, $20,460.52. Health and public assistance, $2,527.36. Public works and engineering, $132,009.16. Community affairs, $1,796.11. Finance and borough clerk, $3,433,967.06. Utilities, $307,050.36. The total is $3,897,810.57.
I move the vouchers.
Any discussion? Roll call vote.
Mr. Catalanello?
Yes.
Mr. Landrigan?
Yes.
Mrs. Vitale?
Yes.
Ms. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Wolkowitz?
Yes.
Mr. Rowe?
Yes.
I do have one new business, so I apologize. I didn't get this out to the council, but it's more of a formality as opposed to anything else. We had a resignation from the Zoning Board of Adjustment of Ron Potter. Carl Hess is the first alternate with a expiration of his term of December 31st, 2015. So I just want to appoint him to the unexpired term of Ron Potter, which ends the same day. He will actually serve the same role because he would be active because the regular member is not there. So to appoint Carl Hess of Park Avenue to regular member of the Zoning Board of Adjustment with the unexpired term of December 31st, 2015. I have a motion on that.
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call vote.
Mr. Catalanello?
Yes.
Mr. Landrigan?
Yes.
Mrs. Vitale?
Yes.
Ms. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Wolkowitz?
Yes.
Mr. Rowe?
Yes.
And with
That's it.
that,
And with that, I move that we adjourn.
thank you.
I know, you're right. What can I say?
Thanks for coming.
Thank you, John.
I was laughing.
I'm going to have that many, right? Maybe
Well, I have the
You got some, oh, yeah, never mind. Yeah, and I can't sign that, can I? So we'll do it tomorrow.
The governor passed the superintendent task. He said, oh, it'll force all the other